Here to discuss those stories and the week's other top political headlines is the host of the WGN Political Report, Paul Wissing. Thanks for coming.
Hello, guys.
First of all, let's talk about that Senate vote today. Let's talk about the infighting that's going on with the Democrats. What does this mean? Is larger things to come, more problems to come between them?
Well, yeah, the Democrats didn't handle this very well. So ultimately, look, the fact that in the end they voted to pass the CR, the continuing resolution, probably the right decision for what some of the things Democrats have said, which is even worse if you don't. Although people should understand that what this CR includes is I wrote some things down, 800 million cuts in VA facilities, 30 million cuts from farmers, no more money for FEMA, as though there won't be any problems happening, but there is an increase of 488 million for ICE. So there's some Republican priorities in there. But what I think the problem here was the way Chuck Schumer handled it. When he said yesterday, we got to fight this, we got to show the Republicans what we stand for, and the Democrats stood with him. Hours later, I'm going to support this thing. That was a real crisis of leadership. In fact, Hakeem Jeffries, the leader of the House with the minorities, Democrats, was asked today, is it time for Senate leadership? He said, next question. So yeah, there's problems among the Democrats in terms of how they go forward. In the end, by the way, Chuck Schumer was not one of the yes votes for the bill itself. Well, but his point was, he wasn't needed for the yes votes. In fact, the fact that Senator Shaheen, who was the only Democrat, I think we said two Democrats, but the other one was Angus King, an independent, who votes with the Democrats. But the bottom line is that they didn't need any Democrats or independents. They had the Republican votes. The key vote was getting it through cloture, which was the end of debate. That's what Schumer gave him.
The story we told beforehand was the president going to the Department of Justice, and as we said, he railed against the former president. He railed against the people who did investigations against us. He also, at one point, mentioned that he may jail his opponents. And it kind of was all over the place. And in the end, he danced to YMCA.
Well, that was the aspect. Well, okay, a couple of things. First of all, this is where when I talk about this kind of thing, I like to say I'm taking off the political hat and putting on my legal hat. Because, again, having worked with the Department of Justice for decades, that's sort of where my mind goes. The YMCA thing at the end, however, is what gave a lot of people, a lot of analysts a sense is this was very much like a political rally. And so much of what he did, a lot of the old stories, and you went back to James Comey, just on and on with the old stories. But the concerns really for today are the fact that, first of all, presidents don't speak of the Department of Justice. It's probably happened 4 times in the last series of decades.
Did a couple of years
he
ago,
did when Eric Holder was retiring, and there was a time of opening the building.
Right.
That's when I think that was Reagan. That's when presidents have spoken there, but they don't do that. So that he spoke, and by the way, this wasn't in front of the rank and file DOJ members. It was from an invited guest audience. So that raises other questions. Okay. He had an agenda to make place. When he said, "I am the leading law enforcement officer of the country," no, he's not. The Attorney General is the leading law enforcement officer. We talked for so many times prior to the election about the Department of Justice being independent from the presidency. It is part of the executive branch, but it is not under the rule of the presidency. Never has been. So all of the claims that Joe Biden, and I know our Trump supporters believe Biden weaponized the government, the DOJ. Biden did not weaponize the DOJ. He kept it independent. Proof, his own son was indicted and tried. But the bottom line here is, now we have the current president who says, I'm the head of the Justice Department, says we need to go after the media, that they're illegal, that we have to go, and he literally started naming individual lawyers who, that is just really problematic. And so for folks who say, well, Biden didn't weaponize the Department of Justice, what does it look like? This is what it looks like. This is weaponization. I say that as a lawyer, not as a political person. As a lawyer, that's the way this is happening.
Let's talk about anti-Semitism on college campuses. College campuses here in Chicago and in Illinois are being targeted by the government, and Mayor Brandon Johnson has to go once again and testify in Capitol Hill in front of the DOJ.
So here's the thing. If you were to talk to aldermen in the city, I think a lot of them would tell you, yeah, we do have a problem with anti-Semitism on the campuses, and yeah, we're not handling it all that well. Now, the question is, the Trump administration sends the letter to Mayor Johnson saying, we want to talk to you again. But I think most aldermen here, and maybe even the mayor, would say, yes, we have problems. I think that next step would be, we're addressing it. Let us deal with it. Are we dealing with it very well? Doesn't seem to be handling it well.
What do they hope to accomplish by talking to the mayor?
Well, I think based on...
And the other mayors have been invited as well.
Well, and some of them, remember, they brought him in for deportation. Right. I think the bottom line is this is a federal government and an administration that wants to do a lot of things on its own. So I think the bottom line is if President Trump were to answer that question, he'd probably say, I want to find out what the mayor's doing. And if the mayor isn't doing enough, I, President Trump, am going to be sending in whatever he feels he needs to send in to address these issues. It's problematic because when you get into that area, yes, the anti-Semitism has got to be addressed. But you walk on this line of free speech, which is the situation going on in New York and other people. There is a line between, even though somebody may say, look, I grew up in Skokie in the 1970s, and I'm old enough to remember when the Nazis were going to march in Skokie. All of my neighbors were Holocaust survivors. And the Supreme Court, when Skokie went to the court and said, you can't let Nazis march on the streets where we were the victims in concentration camps, literally. And the Supreme Court said, their words, lower your shades. That's how powerful the clause of the First Amendment of free speech is. Real tough to swallow, but that's the power of free speech. So when you start to put people in jail over what they've said, not charge them with anything, that's problematic in terms of where the line for free speech is getting drawn.
Which brings up Mahmoud Khalil
Yeah, exactly.
in Colombia.
Well, he's been charged with
University,
nothing.
right.
He's been detained. He has a green card. He's not, he didn't cross a border and he's here illegally. So they're dealing with him. But even if actually even if he wasn't, even with a green card, he has the right to free speech here. I understand there's a lot of people. I'm not saying anything about what he's saying or supporting it or disagreeing with it.
Well, what are they holding him on then?
Well, we don't know. I mean, that's the problem. That's
He's in
part of
Louisiana, too.
What's that?
He's in Louisiana.
And so far he's charged with nothing.
Yeah.
And the effort is to try and deport him, with Marco Rubio basically being charged with the authority of having this happen. But right now it appears that he's been charged with nothing. But what he's been accused of is a speech that people don't like. I have a lot of speech I don't like. But you can't deport people for saying it. That is part of what living in America means, is the freedom of free speech. Even when people say things you don't like.
Give me the definition of a tariff and what this means. All this week, Donald Trump has tariffs going here and there. Now he's putting tariffs on wine and on champagne.
That one's got you upset, doesn't it?
I'm very upset about that one.
I know.
But yeah, what is it? The tariffs are coming
Your
back
French
on the
winery
people.
called me and said they were very concerned. Well, look, here's what people need to understand. President Trump keeps presenting this. We're going to put all these 200% tariffs on foreign wines and champagnes, which, by the way, champagne, as you know, only comes from champagne. He talks about we're going to have better champagne here. We don't make champagne.
You can't.
We make brut, make other things.
It's illegal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We don't make champagne. But the bottom line to it is, what's going to happen is that 200% tariff is going to increase the price of wine tremendously when it comes into the country. The importers are going to pay it. The importers are going to give it to the stores and whatnot, and they're going to charge us. That is the way tariffs work. So if none of these tariffs go away, be prepared to have tremendous percentages or whatever these numbers are come to us. The consumer is going to eventually pay this. And the bottom line is, what's important to know, that when we've had tariff wars in the past, they don't come and go. They don't, okay, today we'll take them off tomorrow. I mean, you could today because they haven't happened yet. But if in 6 months he takes them up, it has taken decades for the effect of things to go away. Example, and why would that be? Because when a corporation's making a lot of money selling things at a higher price, even though the tariff went away and the prices have come down, anybody want to nominate a corporation that says, let's lower our prices for the consumer?
Not to mention how it's affecting the stock market and other things like that.
Yeah,
and gold,
exactly.
which we found out, which is surging because of it.
Way up.
Yeah.
Exactly. And people, that's right, check your 401ks.
Yeah.
Or maybe don't check your 401ks.
Yeah,
But for right
ignore
now,
that.
it's a problematic situation. President Trump says it's short-term pain. We'll see. But right now, it's a very uncomfortable pain for a lot of people who live
Before
paycheck
we
to
let you
paycheck.
go,
Yeah.
Rahm Emanuel for president?
What do you think? So we're going to talk about it. There was an article in Politico. It just appeared a couple of days ago. And so on this Sunday, I'm going to have the author of that article appear with me. And
Jonathan Martin.
Thank you. I'm just drawing a blank.
From
Jonathan
Politico.
Martin will be there from Politico. It was a great article. I've interviewed him before, so I called him and I said, would you come talk about this? He said, let's do it. So I think it's a fairly exclusive article, at least in Chicago, fairly exclusive interview. He's going to talk about that. And I'm going to ask him about, what about Rahm versus JB? They probably both want to be a president. Right. And the thing is, Rahm was on CNN the other night, and Caitlin Collins said to him, well, there's this Politico article. You're going to run for president. His answer was, when I have something to say, I'll say it. Here's the bottom line. I don't think both Rahm and JB run for president. I think there will be a discussion about that between them. We'll see what happens. My other guest this Sunday, by the way, if I can share that, will be Alderman Brian Hopkins of the Second Ward. So much to talk to him about, including the cuts in the government, how we're feeling it in the healthcare system, the education system, and all these other places. All that Sunday at 9 when I know, Jackie, you're up watching it.
Always,
Yes.
always,
Thank
of
you.
course.
Yeah, I set the DVR.
Thank you.
Still, thank you.